Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with a short review of the fourth short story, science fiction short story of Isaac Asimov, To Meet the Public. By now it should be clear from the sequence that I'm presenting these things, it is in publication order rather than the order that they're written, even as I'm also showing them in their original publications, at least where possible, obviously, the last case as originally seen, or as close to that as I can get. So, this, the fourth story of his to see the light of day, was a little ditty known as the Endless HalfBreed. And once again, we have ourselves a very astonishing Isaac Asimov artifact. So, now you can actually see, this, by the way, was the first time he gets his name on the cover. HalfBreed, his story by Isaac Asimov. There's other stories too. It's not the illustration. The illustration belongs to Holton Cross's Chameleon Planet. I don't know what's going on in that one. And there's also the White Land of Venus. It's also by somebody else. And also down at the bottom, half cut off, is HalfBreed, and others. Okay, so that was the original place where HalfBreed meets its public. So, what exactly do we have in that? We have a little bit more here. That story, by the way, is commonly available in his, the early Asimov, and most of these stories are. In fact, the only exceptions are the Marooned Off Vesta, which was in Asimov's Mysteries. I showed that in that installment. Nightfall, which will be in its own collection. The Robot Stories, and the Foundation Stories. That's everything that had been collected before. Early Asimov features all those stories from that period that were not published in other collections like this. So, that said, let's take a look at HalfBreed. It's generally considered a very poor story. Okay, it's not great literature. I can't argue with that. The HalfBreeds, well, okay. What really makes this story less than ideal? Is it that bad of a story itself? Not really. In fact, I think it's really kind of great. It brings in important issues. Remember, we're looking at, this is 1939, 1940 time era. He wrote the story in 39, but it didn't see print until 1940, in which he's concerned. Hitler is carving up Europe, and there was a lot of big fear about that. And as a Jew, he's kind of concerned. So matters of things like race and so forth, and racism are a very specific and vital concern, and this shows in his stories. And we saw quite a bit of that in the Weapon Too Dreadful to Use. Now we see it again here in HalfBreed. So, but now let's look at the premise of all this. So, that's kind of, it's interesting commentary that, is obviously something to know. And, but let's take a look at the story as a story. Now, it's described as pulpish. Yeah, although it's not quite as nastily pulpish. This is actually the 11th story that he wrote. So he's now in quite a ways. His style is starting to relax a little bit and become a little bit more like a real writer and less like a typical science fiction pulpish. I think you still have somebody whirl and somebody else at some point. They do that a lot. I neglected to mention that earlier, but it's like, why does somebody whirl? Because you turn around suddenly and look at you, maybe you're talking in this direction or you're facing this direction, and then you need to talk to somebody suddenly you go, hey, you know, and it's like that happens a lot in these early stories. But what's the other kind of stuff? The main trope is probably that makes it pulpish is there's still life on Venus, life on Mars. Heck, in this one, Mars managed to evolve human life forms of, or humanoid life forms, I should say, of sufficient similarity to ourselves to be capable of interbreeding with us. I mean, that something like that might exist vaguely out in the universe somewhere still seems ridiculously unlikely. I'm sorry, Mr. Spock, half human, half Vulcan is. Well, anyone ever noticed Mr. Spock doesn't seem to have any children? You know, so I don't know. Half breed between human and Vulcan, but it doesn't seem to be like a brand new race, as it were. Well, it turns out a half breed between a human and Martian in this story is a breed, and apparently a breed capable of breeding itself and turning into, quite literally, its own brand new race. We never get to see the Martians, by the way. We just kind of know that these are half Martians, half Earthlings. So, and apparently, this is set at a time where apparently it seemed reasonable or appropriate for people to just be raised in special institutions. Sometimes you can see kind of a rationale, like think of all the children who got polio and had to spend years, or in some cases the rest of their lives, in an iron lung or something. You're not going to have these people going out in normal society unless maybe they can outgrow that iron lung. Maybe some did. They're going to, they're, as long as they're being tended somewhere by probably some state-run institution. So the idea was that these half-breed between humans and Martians were kind of like being similarly kept, though they're not similarly limited in any way. They're really persons in every ordinary recognizable sense of the word. That they were treated as something that has to be kept, adopted, somebody's ward, and so on it goes. But let's take a look at them now. In the magazine, we have a couple glimpses of these half-breeds. Probably the most obviously dramatic feature is this hair they have that always seems to point straight up. So no matter what, I'm not sure what happens if they sleep. Does it still point to the ceiling? I don't know. In fact, the first place I see their hair described in the text, it actually sounds like it goes in all directions, straight out from the head, in whatever part of the head it's on. So it should be this big round thing instead of, well, what you see here. So here's some these half-breeds. They are packing, in fact, and this apparently is, they're all heading towards this one of, in fact, 3 spaceships that they're going to use as a mass migration from Earth to Venus. But that comes a little later in the story, but it made a neat cover picture. And one other bit of artwork that's kind of cool, and this is supposed to portray the moment. Remember, this is before anybody had, as they put it, split the atom. That too was this big thing. Science was pressing for that. It was going to happen real soon. We just didn't quite know how and who. But at any rate, mirror. Alright, this portrays Jefferson Scanlon in his laboratory. He's made this thing where the glow that's surrounded is the glow of atomic power for the first time. Nobody knew what it would look like once you actually get it. This little figure to the right here. How do I get a hold of it here? Uh-oh. There's how little figure to the right here, if you look closely, is also one of our half-breeds. So, because it starts, this is actually described as a novelette. It comes in 4 chapters, which the 4 chapters, when it got reprinted in the early Asimov, and probably never be reprinted anywhere else that I can think of. Early Asimov was enough. But they took out the chapter headings. They also took out half Earth, half Mars, and Tweed. So, okay. HalfBreed by Isaac Asimov, a novelette. And then it says chapter 1, The Tweenie. Because it starts with Jefferson Scanlon meeting up with one of these tweenies under a certain circumstance I will get to presently. Chapter 2 is The Secret of Atomic Power. So it happens that, so this one starts with a week later, Scanlon was in his workshop during the night before. His brain, restored by the charge in the monotony brought about by the presence of Max, had thought of a possible solution. Okay. Then there's a chapter 3, which is The Tweenie's Mate. This one starts off with Jefferson Scanlon sucked at his pipe contentedly. Outside, the snow was falling and the chill of winter was in the air. But inside, in comfortable warmth, Scanlon sat and smoked and smiled to himself. Across the way, Olia, he's a housekeeper, older than himself. I guess he's looked after him since he was little, so the housekeeper's much older. Okay. Likewise, quietly happy, hummed softly to tie to the cooking knitting needles. Anyways, this is kind of setting a scene where he suddenly said something that kind of sets a direction for what is to come. And finally, we get to the last chapter, chapter 4, 40 years later, and Venus. Okay. Because now it suddenly starts with at 80. Age sat lightly upon Jefferson Scanlon's head. So let's take a look at these sections. Let's just describe what's in these sections one by one. In the first one, he meets the tweenie. Well, he's just this guy. Oh, here's one of the things that doesn't hold up too well. He's middle-aged. He's past the first flush of youth at the grand old age of 30. Well, look, Isaac was like 19 when he wrote this. 30 seemed old, and the other's like really old. So, he's past being a young kid. He's a determined bachelor. He missed his chance at getting married, I guess, and now has moved on to more being able to just be this pure scientist and devote his life to being the guy who discovered atomic power. So, anyway, so that's one little pulpish element there. He's minding his business. He takes a little walk because his experiment isn't going well. And he sees a bunch of kids picking on another kid. Why? Because he's different. He's one of these tweenies. Oh, well, that's all the reason you need to make somebody's life miserable. Kids could be very cruel, especially when they grow up. And apparently something of a culture that's just kind of said that if they're not us, you can pick on them. And nobody seems to mind. I mean, obviously the person picked on mind, but other than that, So, and here's, he's a scientist, he's thinking, and he can see, look, these kids are picking on an obviously harmless, kindly, rational being. They're beating up on him with a stick, even, and he chases them away. Get out of here, you crazy idiots, get out of here. And he sees his poor tweenie kid beaten practically to a pulp. Here, let me take you home and, I take you in, and he happens to have a spare bedroom and you can set him up in and some clothes to give him and so forth. His housekeeper, interesting, is all, I don't approve of this. I don't think your mom would take this too well. And, it's like, you losing your morals? Morals? He's kind to a random stranger who's been getting hurt and persecuted for no real reason, and we question his morals. Well, Olia comes around. She does, so, But at least in this first part, she's kind of wondering. So he's got to kind of try to make things habitable for this tweenie. The next part, we talk about atomic power. It turns out that this tweenie is a being of extraordinary ability. Being a combination of the Martian and the Earthling, somehow the tweenie gets the best of both. The energy, the impulse, the drive of a human, coupled with the sheer cold intellect and brilliance of a Martian. And these two aspects combine in being what it takes to solve what went wrong with the experiment. Which brings us to probably one of the other pulpish little details about this. And that had to do with, if you remember, that experiment is a big round thing. There's a reason it's drawn that way. That's not just being drawn that way. It really is. So, oops. Oh, I'm wrong here. I'm going to look for this. So, why did it do that? Why is it drawn like that? Well, at any rate, what he does is, oh, here we go. Well, I noticed here in your equations, he extracted one sheet and another and pointed that whenever the expression representing the space distortion field occurs, it is always as a function of x squared plus y squared plus z squared. Since the fields, as far as I can see, were always referred to as constants, that would give you the equation of a sphere. And he nodded, well, I noticed that, but I didn't see what that had to do with the problem. I said, well, I thought maybe it might indicate the necessary arrangement of the individual fields. Well, I wonder what he would have been doing with them before, but okay. In other words, he's got this little sphere. Why is he doing that? He's throwing in a little bit of real science. And actually, all said and told, I think it's done much more smoothly than, and I'm going to, for comparison, I meant to bring this up in Marooned Off Vesta, but that's okay. I can discuss it now where the pulpishness gets really alarming. Where here they try to inject a little bit of science. Remember, in Marooned Off Vesta, they're stranded, they're in orbit around Vesta, and they're looking down at it. It's like the brightest asteroid by far, and they're saying, funny place, Vesta. I was down there 2 or 3 times. What a dump. It's all covered with some stuff like snow. Oh yeah, it ain't snow. I forget what they call it. Frozen carbon dioxide? Prompted more. Yeah, dry ice. That carbon stuff. That's it. They say that's what makes Vesta so shiny. Of course! That would give a high albedo. No. I mean, it's true. Yeah, correct. I mean, he's trying to weave in a little bit of real science. But you can just see how clumsily it's done. Here, we've brought in a little bit of science, well, in this case, actually some mathematics, analytic geometry to be precise. And we brought it in, and at least somewhat less clumsily. Well, we move on to the next stage, where we want to get a mate for him. So he goes into various places where apparently tweenies are being held in various institutions here and there. And at length, he finally finds Tweenie. It's about the right age. Seems like she ought to be attractive. Now, Jefferson Scanlon is so dense when his Tweenie that he's adopted and taken into and helped him significantly in his experiment, is the name Max, by the way. And Tweenie is, Max says to Jefferson, I'm getting lonely. Well, maybe I can find a friend for you. And it's like, it takes Belulia to figure out, he's not talking about a friend, he's talking about a girlfriend. Oh! I don't know if I can do that. I wouldn't know his type, which is actually a valid concern, but somehow that doesn't seem to be a concern. He finds what seems to him, and obviously as it turns out, it seems to Max, a perfectly reasonable female tweenie to be his companion. And Max is happy with that, and they're all happy, and apparently they start a little place called Tweenie Town. He finds a place in Ohio. Okay. Well, I mean, you got Amish in places like that. Why not a community of tweenies? I mean, this is a day where ghettoization is often considered a reasonable solution to different sorts of people that don't normally get on too well with each other, on a day-to-day basis. Like we could like Italians or Japanese, but it doesn't mean you want to live next to them. Kind of attitude that people had in those days. So we could, we may or may not be able to be, decent and humane to a tweenie, and hopefully expect the same from the tweenie. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't have meant in those days that we would want a tweenie as our neighbor. But he had adopted Max. Now he adopted a female tweenie plus a couple of little girl tweenies, and before long he starts trying to, he's discovered atomic power. He's fabulously rich. He can basically afford to adopt every tweenie on the face of the earth and let them start coming together and themselves breeding like a brand new race in this big chunk of land he was able to purchase in Ohio. And so you got a tweenie town growing, and that's really great. Now here's another place it talks about the romance. Yeah, but remember, Asimov when he wrote this, never had a girlfriend yet. Didn't really know, didn't have any sisters. Really didn't know much about girls except his mother, which you don't see a mother the way you see a girlfriend, and so he has no idea how that actually goes, and it actually happens in the way the story. They're kind of shy around each other, and then Jefferson Scanlon leaves the room and leaves all of the helping to break the ice all in Violia's capable hand, by which one she is a full convert to what he's doing, by helping the tweenies. And so she helps bring. We don't see how any of that. We don't see any of how they got really brought together as a couple, because that he had no idea what would happen. Just here they are. They're kind of shy in front of each other, and our main character leaves, and when he comes back later on, they're a happy couple. And Beolia helped in some way, and says hours later, "Well, I helped them together," and I guess she did. So that's one way. She's trying to do a romance for the first time in any of his stories, but obviously knowing nothing about it, he had to leave practically the whole thing out, and probably just as well. I hate to think of him trying to write silly love talk in the mood that he was in a science fiction writing mood he was in. I hate to think what that would look like if he actually attempted it. So no, he just kind of jumps past it. So now and there's a couple, like an old married couple. And Madeline is the name of the female twin. So Max and Madeline are like an old married couple, and so forth. So then we move to the that was the third part. Now the fourth part is the migration to Venus. Turns out they knew they weren't going to be able to do well here on Earth. That Earth's going to be a problem for them, and part of the problem is because since they seem to have acquired the best of both humans and Earth and Martians, they could be the object of envy because they're so bright and so capable and so industrious and so all this stuff. They've actually built several spaceships, which we saw back in the picture at the front, so that they could all go to Venus, which of course in this story is a perfectly habitable planet, not very much populated yet, but populated. They're going to move there. I hope it's not too hot for them. And so there they are, or they're getting ready to take off. But they weren't going to take off until after Jefferson Scanlon died, except then Jefferson reveals, the tweenies, what they've been doing, how helpful they've been, how significant they've been to the development of atomic power and numerous other inventions that have changed everything significantly. And suddenly they realize, this other guy visits and says, "Yeah, we got to do something about this right away." Like, we need to do something to keep these tweenies under our thumb, or I don't know what. And that's when they realize, no, we need to go right now. So they all just board these rocket ships they'd already built for the trip, and we're just saving up for when he's gone. Now they're just using them right away. They fly off to Venus, and so that's kind of some tearful goodbyes, and suddenly Tweenie Town's this vacated place, and it's kind of sad wandering around there. But he can think to himself, he says, "Oh, maybe this is what it feels like to be my children become a successful thing. They're gonna take over the galaxy. I don't know what it feels like to be a god." Very foolish. Well, as I say, you can see there's an awful lot of weaknesses with it, but he is kind of taking on, in some ways, the racism of the day once again. But people could be treated bad for just being different that way. And that's just. And he is a Jew watching, Hitler, scared that Hitler will take over the world. Was understandably concerned. So that's there's still a couple of places where Jefferson Scanlon calls Max boy. Like that's he doesn't even notice. I mean, people will just say things like that and not even realize it. That's not really the way to respond. Is that okay or not here? I mean, after all, Jefferson Scanlon is middle aged, yeah, 30, right? And meanwhile, Max, as he's finding him, is barely out. Maybe at the end or barely out of his teens, so he is younger. So it's not totally inappropriate to have said, "So come here, boy, so boy, you can use this room." you know. So, but it still sounds like, you know what I mean? If somebody says boy and they don't say it in a way that's not friendly. Now obviously here it's meant in a friendly sense. He's being paternalist, and another place a little later he calls him son. And, he has really in effect adopted these tweenies like sons. So, but it's kind of interesting. So much at that time, he's concerned. He's really writing about the evils of it. But some of it's just so ingrained that even without realizing it, it's not totally as ideally flawlessly perfect as the kind of standards we ask for today. You know, I think we need to consider that a real mark of, no, things are not perfect, obviously. We're still working on it. And I think we've had some setbacks over the last few decades, but, but I think there is an overall trend towards trying to get this all, ironed out, and people don't just accept each other the way I think most people do. Certainly when we're on our best behavior, but even other times we need to learn to do that. And the sensitivity is still not a good thing, but I think it's so small that here he is so concerned and yet carrying forth a little bit of that insensitivity without even realizing it. So, anyway, I found this an interesting story from that standpoint. So, that's all I have.